Chapter 3, The United States Constitution. What was the justification for declaring independence from Britain and establishing the United States government? Let's add yet another sentence to the familiar passage from the Declaration's preamble. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, that to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed, that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. End quote. The purpose for creating a new government, according to the Declaration, was to secure natural rights and protect liberty. But what is to prevent the new government from becoming too powerful? How could the founders encourage those they would put in power to resist the impulse of simply doing what they feel like doing in the moment, leading to corruption of the country's soul, and instead lean into the pull of the transcendent, to act in the best long-term interests of the people, and to do what they were called to do, protect natural rights and liberties? Is it not obvious? The government needs a conscience. The new country laid its foundation on principles and organized its powers in such a form they saw as, quote, most likely to affect their safety and happiness, end quote, by ensuring the country's new government would have a conscience. The Constitution of the United States serves as the government's conscience, as defined by Plato. Heading: the government's conscience. The way the new government was constructed prevented those in power from simply imposing their will on the people of the new nation. Political rulers are people too. When people talk about government as some sort of all-knowing entity with deep pockets, so deep that no one is actually paying for the benefits being bestowed on the country or the people therein, it can be easy to forget that government is actually just people. Flawed people. People who, just like you and I, are capable of doing great good and great evil or great harm. Yet, somehow we think if we elected them, they must be infallible or something. That is definitely how many officials are portrayed by members of their own party. While at the same time, officials who belong to the opposing party are framed as never doing the right thing ever. If that is possible for an official in the other party, does that not make it possible that the government official you voted for and whose party you support, is it not possible that they could be the one in the wrong all the time too? But no, only when an official belongs to the party you personally disagree with can you find fault with everything they say and stand for. Unless, of course, in real democracy fashion, they say or do something out of character for the party you disagree with, and instead wholeheartedly support the position of the party you do agree with. Even then, though, Americans tend to forget that each official is a person, a fallible human being with their own drives and desires, their own pursuits, and with the capability of doing both good and evil. So the Constitution, it prevented the government from too easily giving into its lower self, its temperamental self that could change on a whim. It prevented the government from being controlled by the drives, emotions, impressions, and ideas that are propelled by the mood of the moment. The way the new government was formulated served to introduce the struggle between doing evil and getting away with it because everyone thinks they are doing good versus the pain caused by doing what they know they should do for long-term health, sustainability, and overall benefit. The United States is an experiment because it was the first country to introduce a complex conscience for their government, a conscience that introduced a struggle into every single layer of every decision-making process. Most importantly, though, the U.S. Constitution was crafted to resist the allure of democracy, of the sovereign determining the general will, and being given power enough to decide happiness for everyone, even for those who disagreed with them, forcing them to be free. The U.S. Constitution prevented a simple majority, the government's power-hungry lower self, from ruling over the political minority without at least some pushback, and not through just one mechanism, but several. The founders were intent on preventing tyranny by the majority. Here's where it gets interesting, and the discussion about democracy from chapter 1 seems most relevant, and where I will mention again that we are a constitutional federal republic. Right now, we are talking about the constitutional part of the equation, but as you'll see in this next section, we're about to move into the Republican part. Heading: Republican government. The first preventative measure written into the Constitution to ensure the lower self must at the very least struggle against the higher self in order to prevail was simply to outright reject majoritarian democracy in favor of a representative democracy, where the American people vote for other people who then vote on the issues. This is always a fun argument on social media these days. Everyone is, of course, talking about threats to democracy and protecting democracy, and then inevitably, someone who knows at least a little something will pipe up and say, "We are not a democracy, we are a republic," and then the rebuttal comes, "A republic is just a representative democracy, so a republic is just a representative democracy, so it is still a democracy." But two things here. It is not just a republic. It is not just a representative democracy. A republic is not just a representative democracy, and we are not just a republic. Was set up as a constitutional federal republic. And again, all three words are important, which is why we are talking about the Constitution now. And the best thing I've heard in this argument, in this back and forth recently, was that the reason why they're substituting democracy for republic is that they want everyone to think we are a democracy, to subliminally convince people to vote Democrat in the elections. And simultaneously, they're trying to eliminate the idea of republic and the word from our lexicon to undermine the Republican Party. When I saw this, when I heard this, I actually paused and said, I guess that's actually a decent theory. I mean, it's not one that I hold to, however, because everyone seems to have bought into the democracy narrative. I mean, even Republicans, even people who otherwise seem liberty-minded. It's just amazing to me how many people just effortlessly, without thinking, talk about our democracy. And maybe they're just talking about our elections, but I instead think it simply speaks to an idea that I address much later in the book, and that is that those who would destroy our liberty instead of protecting our rights have successfully changed our language and have successfully convinced the American people that they live in a democracy, which will make it much easier to act as a democracy and to justify the sovereign's, the government's power over the American people. But those voting on issues were not supposed to remain in power forever. This is seen in the fact that frequent and periodic elections are supposed to take place. If representatives had terms for life, there's a very good chance they would cease to represent the voters and simply seek to govern for their own benefit, increasing their own power and wealth and status. Oh, wait, doesn't it sometimes seem like they're in it for life and that they're doing everything to increase their own power and wealth and status? I don't know. The American voter was supposed to replace those governing them every 2, 4, or 6 years. With an ever-rotating membership within the halls of government, this would prevent a permanent majority from trampling the political minority. But not only was there supposed to be an ever-changing roll call in Congress, but representation is supposed to be geographic in nature. Unlike other Western democracies where constituents vote for parties and the parties choose their legislative members, not all Americans vote for all representatives. This would be too close to a majoritarian democracy. Instead, both the representative and the voters are supposed to be from the geographical region and area the government official is supposed to represent. Not to mention, how can a representative from New York faithfully represent constituents from Florida? Are the needs of those in Minnesota the same as the needs of those living in Arizona? And let's face it, if we live in a representative democracy, do you feel like each elected official is actually representing their constituents, the interests of their state, the interests of their district? I mean, the person we elect may be voting on issues, but do you believe they are voting on issues in the way that represents the will of their constituents? We're going to come back to some of these other aspects of Republican government in the next chapter, but suffice it to say, I do not believe our representative government is representing the will of their constituents, nor do I believe they are acting as statesmen, doing what is in the best long-term interest of the country as a whole. Statesmen are those who supposedly reject their lower self and base their desires of the moment and the political whims of the moment in favor of long-term interests, the long-term interests of the country, of everyone in the country. I just don't see that happening. If anything, they are serving their own long-term interests, which have very little to do with what is in the best interest for the country as a whole. And I think, going up to the previous paragraph, more about increasing their own power and wealth and status.